Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everyone, and welcome to my newest 2022 NFL mock draft. The 2022 NFL draft continues to get closer and closer, and today, to celebrate the holidays, I'll be making my next mock draft. I love the NFL draft, and I love making predictions for the NFL draft, so if that sounds like your type of content, this is definitely a channel for you, so make sure to subscribe to see all my draft content as we count down the months until the NFL draft. Also, just like in my Thanksgiving mock draft, the draft order that I'll be using is my predicted order for the rest of the season. I looked at the schedule for the rest of the year, made my predictions, and based the order off that. But I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get right into it with the first pick, where the Jacksonville Jaguars are on the clock. The Jags fired Urban Meyer after less than a year in charge and have easily been the worst team in the NFL this season. Trevor Lawrence hasn't worked out with the Jags so far, but to be fair to him, he hasn't been given the greatest coach or pieces around him. The Jags have the choice of anyone right now, and at first overall with so many needs, I think it's worth it to pick the best player in the class. There is a bit of a debate, but at least in my opinion, as of right now, the best player in the class is Michigan's Aiden Hutchinson. Hutchinson has been completely lights out this season and helped lead Michigan to the college football playoff. With 14 sacks, 58 tackles, and 2 forced fumbles, Hutchinson finished second in Heisman voting, a truly incredible feat, especially for a defensive lineman. Hutchinson has been the main man on an excellent Michigan defense and truly has the attributes to one day do the same at the NFL level. He also fills a huge need for the Jaguars on the defensive line. The debate between Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau could get interesting as we continue to count down the months to the NFL draft, but for now I believe that Hutchinson is the slightly better player and should be the pick. Next up is the Lions, who all of a sudden have started to play well, and maybe they have a solid future ahead of them. This pick, at least for me, is very simple though. The Lions still have a huge need on the defensive line, so I see them bringing in arguably the best player in the class, Kayvon Thibodeau. Though Thibodeau isn't really the consensus number one pick like he kind of was a few weeks ago, he is still an undoubted top 3 prospect in the class who will only continue his college dominance in the NFL. Thibodeau had some trouble staying on the field earlier this season with an injury, but is still a top prospect in the class because of his ridiculous athleticism, speed, and just pure dominance over the past few years with Oregon. A dominant 3 seasons with the Ducks, Thibodeau is still arguably the number 1 prospect in the class and should absolutely be a top 3 pick or so at the draft. The Houston Texans are up at number 3, and they've managed to win a couple games this season, but are still one of the worst teams in the NFL. They're another team who I think needs help on the edge, but with both of the top 2 edge rushers off the board, I think they'll go for arguably the best player available, who would also fill a big need for them, which is offensive tackle Evan Neal from Alabama. Neal has been sturdy and solid as can be for Alabama, and has been a consistent force on the offensive line. The Texans need help at the tackle positions, and Neal could come in and be an immediate starter and improvement from what they have now. The New York Jets are next on the clock, and they desperately need help in their secondary. While they have quite a few weak spots in the squad, the biggest is definitely in the secondary, and the best cornerback in the class is Derek Stingley Jr. from LSU. This is the exact same pick that I had the Jets going with last time, but that's because it's a pick that makes a ton of sense. Stingley has had issues staying on the field since his unbelievable record-breaking freshman season, but whenever he's on the football field, he's been one of the best cornerbacks in the SEC and in college football in general. His ball skills really stand out to me and help make him one of the best in the class, but with a good frame, speed, and explosiveness, he is definitely an excellent player. If he's able to stay on the field, he could certainly become a star corner in the National Football League. So if he's available here, like I said, it's a pick that makes a ton of sense, and Stingley could really help improve the Jets' lacking secondary. The New York Jets are up at number 5, and just like last time, I'm going to be very quick with this one. Their offensive line is terrible and needs significant improvement. The best offensive lineman available, and in some people's opinion the best in the class, is Ike Ekwonu from NC State. Ekwonu is versatile and was incredible this season, and has made his way towards the top of many draft boards. He's played both offensive guard and tackle with the Wolfpack, and personally I believe he'll play tackle in the NFL. If he's on the board, I definitely think the Giants should bring him in, because getting a top offensive line prospect has to be their number 1 need at the draft. Next up is the Carolina Panthers, and I talked about this in my Thanksgiving mock draft, but I believe that they have one of, if not the worst quarterback room in the NFL. Cam Newton is way out of his prime and has no business being a starting quarterback in the NFL anymore. Sam Darnold was good for a few weeks at the start of the year, but has been awful ever since, and should not be the Panthers' QB going forward. And PJ Walker was a great XFL quarterback, but shouldn't be a short-term or long-term option as the franchise quarterback in the NFL. The Panthers need to find their QB of the future, and of course there are some options in free agency or trade options, but a lot of those players are older in age, and I think it might be best for the Panthers to try and find a long-term option, especially if there's a significant change in the staff this offseason, like some speculate there will be, and as we've already begun to see with Joe Brady being fired, I think it would be best to try and find someone young who could truly be the franchise guy going forward. But now they have the option. This year's quarterback class isn't as strong as in previous years, yet there are still a couple good options. One of them is Matt Corral, who I said would be the first quarterback selected last time, and I think is an excellent quarterback who plays safe and smart football, and this has been a great year for him. But I'm going to switch it up this time. The first quarterback off the board and the Panthers pick will be Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. Pickett was considered around a 5th round pick at best coming into this year, but after a season where he finished 3rd place in Heisman voting out of nowhere, there's a really good chance he's the first quarterback selected at the draft. Pickett threw more than 40 touchdowns this season and more than 4,300 pass yards with only 7 interceptions, on his way to leading Pittsburgh to an 11-2 season where they would win the ACC championship and are currently ranked number 12 in the nation. Pickett is a good leader who a ton of his teammates have praised, gets great velocity on his passes, and has solid arm strength. Like I said, Pickett and Corral are completely interchangeable for me, but for now I have Pickett as the first QB to come off the board. Next up, the Giants are back on the clock with a pick they acquired last year from the Chicago Bears when they traded up for Justin Fields. And I know that I already had the Giants pick an offensive lineman, but their offensive line is still so bad that I think they need to make it even better, and they can do that by bringing the best interior offensive lineman in the class, Tyler Linderbaum. Now, it's not every year we see a center being selected this early on, but it's also not every year that we see a center prospect as good as Linderbaum. Linderbaum is quick and athletic for his big size, has been a first-team All-American multiple times, and is arguably the best lineman in college football. The Giants have one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, but if they're able to bring in Ike Mekwonu and Tyler Linderbaum, it would certainly improve, at least a little bit. Next up is the Las Vegas Raiders, and they've just kind of collapsed after a great start to the season. They have quite a weak interior defensive line that just hasn't been getting as much pressure on quarterbacks as they might hope, but they can begin to help that with the incredible defensive tackle from Georgia, Jordan Davis. Davis was incredible this season, even finishing top 10 in Heisman Trophy voting. Davis has been ridiculously good this season, and I truly believe he could be a top 10 pick in the draft. Davis has good athleticism and agility, is big and strong, and has the versatility to play in multiple different defensive schemes. Davis has just been a complete monster this season, and I really think the Raiders would love to get a guy like him on their team. Next up, the New York Jets are on the clock for the second time because of their Jamal Adams trade with the Seahawks. So far in this mock, the Jets have improved their quarterback room, but their secondary is still quite bad, so I see them going back to improve it at the safety position this time. Someone who's slipping a little bit in mock drafts at the minute, but is still extremely talented, and one of my favorite players in the class is Kyle Hamilton. So if the Jets were able to get him here, that would be brilliant value. Like I said, Hamilton has been falling a little bit in some recent mocks I've seen, but I still believe he is an elite prospect and should without a doubt be a top 10 pick at the draft. I get that safety is a position that doesn't have the highest value in the NFL, but Hamilton is just an incredible prospect. With excellent cross-field skills and spectacular tackling ability, Hamilton has made a big name for himself in the college football world, and I think he could do the same in the NFL. Hamilton creates turnovers, can make any tackle. He's really all you could hope for in a safety prospect, so if he's available at this point in the draft, I think it would be a pretty simple pick for the Jets. The Atlanta Falcons are next on the clock, and Matt Ryan has been with the Falcons for a while, but he's getting up there in age, and is getting to the point where I'm not sure how much longer he should be their franchise QB. Not that he's a bad quarterback, but he certainly can't be there for much longer, and maybe the Falcons could try and trade him this offseason while he still has some value. That means the Falcons will have to try and find their next franchise QB here, and Kenny Pickett isn't available, but arguably still the best QB in the draft. Matt Corral is making him the pick. Like I said, Pickett and Corral are completely interchangeable right now. Both had very solid seasons this year and displayed great fundamentals on the football field. Corral is an improviser, he's accurate, and plays turnover-free football. Corral didn't toss an incredible amount of touchdowns this season, with only 20 through the air, but he also had 11 on the ground, and that is also impressive when you compare it to only 4 interceptions he threw all year. Corral also helped Ole Miss have their best season in recent memory, and I think they won a lot of their games because of him. Corral is good under pressure, has solid arm talent, and has shown that he can be dangerous as a scrambler as well as a passer. Whether you like him more or less than Pickett, you have to agree that Corral is a good QB prospect, and I think the Falcons would love to bring him in here to be the next potential franchise guy. At number 11, the Pittsburgh Steelers are on the clock, and last time I had them taking QB. Roethlisberger has said that he believes he'll be leaving after the season, so maybe bringing in a rookie to be their next franchise QB is what they opt to do. But Mason Rudolph is still on the roster, and there are a ton of trade and free agency options for them this offseason, so while I still do believe quarterback is an option here, I'm going to go with a different position. The Steelers lost Bud Dupree last offseason and need to add some more pressure from the edge, and they can do that with George Karlaftis from Purdue. Though his numbers aren't anything incredible, Karlaftis has made a huge impact with the Boilermakers this season. Karlaftis does still have pretty great numbers with 4.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles this season. He has a large frame and is very athletic and should be a top 10 pick at the draft. Bringing in a great edge rusher like Karlaftis could really help the Steelers out on defense. The Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock at number 12 for the first time of the first round, this time with a pick they acquired from the Miami Dolphins, and I'm going to go for a somewhat controversial pick here. I know the Eagles never draft linebacker in the first round, but when it's clearly a position that they need help at, and when you have 3 first-round picks, I think it's a position that you could draft at. Now, there are a couple of great linebackers in this year's class, but the best in my opinion, at least as of right now, is Georgia's Nakobe Dean. Dean has done absolutely everything for the Bulldogs this year. Over 60 tackles, 5 sacks, a forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. What can he do? Listen, as an Eagles fan, I know that we never draft linebacker, but when there's a do-it-all linebacker like Dean, you at least have to consider the option. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, and based on the way this draft has fallen so far, this is a pick that I think is pretty obvious. The Vikings have tried many times to find a solid star cornerback, but just haven't been able to. This year is a very strong cornerback class, and the best available, arguably a top 10 prospect in the class overall, is Andrew Booth Jr. from Clemson. Even though this has been a bit of a disappointing year for Clemson football, Andrew Booth has remained a constant. 3 interceptions, 5 passes defended, and 35 tackles this season makes this his best statistic season of his career. Booth is incredibly athletic and quick. He's physical, strong, and has long arms. At 6 foot tall, he's just about the right height for an NFL corner, and he's someone who could go to Minnesota and potentially be a day 1 starter. If Booth is on the board on the Vikings pick, I think he has to be the selection. The Washington football team is up next, and I was going back and forth on this one. I do believe that Washington needs to bring in a wide receiver to stand aside Terry McLaurin, but I think the first step to getting production from a wide receiver group is to have a reliable franchise QB. Ryan Fitzpatrick has been out all year, but when he comes back, he certainly won't be expected to be the team's long-term guy going forward, and while Tyler Heineke has shown improvement in recent weeks, I'm not sure he's the guy you could trust to make this team a legit contender, not only for the NFC East, but for the NFC in general. He definitely isn't a bad quarterback, but the question, is he holding them back, might have to be asked. After Corral and Pickett, there really isn't too much of a star quarterback in this class, but there is one guy that stands out. Malik Willis. Willis is pretty much the exact prototype of quarterbacks that thrive in today's NFL. Willis has ridiculous arm talent, something he's shown off many times in his college career, and is an absolutely electric runner. He has blazing speed and can outrun almost every player on the field, which brings plays like read options, something Liberty has done a lot, to the table for Washington. He also gets really good velocity on his passes, and his potential is really the highest out of all the QBs in this class. The reason he isn't a higher touted prospect, though, is because there are a couple issues with him. One of them being his turnovers this season. There were multiple games when he tossed multiple interceptions or fumbled the ball, and it also doesn't necessarily help that most of the time he played against lower competition with Liberty, and then when he played against stronger teams, for example Ole Miss, he struggles. So while Willis is a bit of an interesting prospect, he ended his season on a high with a great bowl win which he performed very well in, and should still be a first-round pick because of his incredible potential. With Washington needing to find their franchise quarterback, at this point in the draft I think Willis is the guy that makes the most sense. At number 15, the Denver Broncos are on the clock, and after moving on from Von Miller earlier this season, they have to find an edge rusher who can come in and replace him, and they might be able to find that with Michigan's David Ojabo. That's right, 2 first-round edge rushers from Michigan. Aiden Hutchinson has been getting all the praise this season, and rightfully so, but David Ojabo has been incredible as well, and has also been a huge part of why Michigan's defensive line has been so deadly this season. With 11 sacks and a ridiculous 5 forced fumbles, Ojabo has found his way on the radar of many NFL scouts. Ojabo also has one of the best stories in the draft. He was born in Nigeria, lived in Scotland as a kid, and didn't start to play football until he was a junior in high school. And last year, he was mostly only a special teams player, but this season he's been given the opportunities, and he has showed out. I love the fit of Ojabo to the Broncos, and I definitely think he could come in and be their next long-term answer at the position. The Saints are on the clock at number 16, and there are a couple options I think they have here. The first one is quarterback. Jameis Winston was good before he got injured, but has an expiring contract after the year, and I'm not sure you can trust Taysom Hill to be a starting quarterback going forward, but I'm going to say that they bring back Winston, or maybe they go for a trade or free agency option. Either way, I don't think this pick will be a QB. The other option, and the option I think the Saints will go with, is wide receiver. Michael Thomas hasn't played at all this year, and I know the Saints receiver group will improve when he comes back, but I still think the unit is decently weak and needs to improve. No wide receivers are off the board yet, so in a quite good receiver class, the Saints have the choice of anyone. I believe they're going to go with the player who is, in my opinion, the best wide receiver in the class, Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. Wilson has great hands and is an explosive receiver. He's also one of the best route runners in the class. Ohio State has a tandem of really great wide receivers, but at least for me, Garrett Wilson has been the standout this season. I would love the pick of Wilson to the Saints, and I think the Saints would also love to bring in a guy like Wilson at this point in the draft. At number 17, the Cleveland Browns are up, and they are another team that needs help at wide receiver. Odell Beckham was never successful with the Browns, and I think they need to see some improvement from the receiver group that they currently have. The wide receiver that has risen the most on draft boards this season has to be Jameson Williams from Alabama. Williams transferred over from Ohio State, and in his first and potentially last year with the Crimson Tide, he was incredible. Nearly 70 catches, nearly 1,500 yards, and 15 touchdowns helped Alabama make the college football playoff, and Williams was Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young's favorite target this season. Williams is an explosive and exciting receiver with good speed and dynamism. He also has good hands. While there are multiple options at the wide receiver position for the Browns here, I believe that Williams will be the one they select. Next up is the Baltimore Ravens, and this is a pick that if this player is available, it should be very simple. With this selection, I have the Ravens selecting DeMarvin Leal. Now, for this pick to happen, Leal would have to fall a bit, but with the way this mock draft has played out, I think there is a chance that happens. Leal has fallen a tiny bit on some draft boards recently, so there is a chance that he slips a little bit more than we'd expect at the draft. With the Ravens potentially losing Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams this offseason, I think they definitely do need some reinforcements on the defensive line. Leal is one of my favorite prospects in the class because of his incredible versatility. He can line up almost anywhere on the defensive line and still have success there. For Texas A&M, he's mostly played on the edge, but with the ability to shift inside and bring pressure from there too. He's coming off the best season of his career this year, having a career-high 8.5 sacks and 58 tackles. Leal is a monster, and if he's available when the Ravens pick, I think they should absolutely select him. At number 19, the Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock, now with their own pick, and I think now is the time to upgrade what is arguably the weakest position on the field for them, the secondary. Darius Slay has been excellent this season, but he's getting up there in age, and I'm not sure how much longer you can expect him to be that number one cornerback. Steven Nelson has an expiring contract after this year, and hasn't been too incredible anyway. The Eagles need a solid corner going forward, and maybe they can find that in Ahmad Gardner from Cincinnati. I really like Gardner as a prospect. He creates turnovers, he's long and lengthy, quick and explosive, and a very good tackler. Gardner has 9 interceptions over the past 3 years and multiple pass breakups to go along with it. The only major issue with him is that he isn't as impressive of an athlete as some of the other corner prospects in the class, but he has been so successful for Cincinnati and will definitely be a first-round pick. Next up is the Buffalo Bills, and I'm basically just going to repeat what I said last time. They lack a true star cornerback partner beside Tre'Davious White, and with this being a very strong cornerback class, there are multiple options for them here, but the best has to be Kaiir Elam from Florida. Elam has plenty of SEC experience, and even when Florida was very poor and very disappointing this season, Elam remained a standout performer. Elam is dynamic and lengthy and a very smart defender. The Bills need to find a partner for Tre'Davious White going forward, and maybe Elam could be that guy. Because of last year's trade with the 49ers, the Miami Dolphins are on the clock at number 21. Their offensive line has been quite poor for a while, especially at the tackle positions. The Dolphins need to find a tackle of the future, and potentially they can find that in Charles Cross from Mississippi State. Cross is coming off an excellent season and has tons of experience against defensive threats in the SEC. Cross seems like a pretty safe pick to me, and I think the Dolphins would certainly be very happy to bring him in here. At number 22, the Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock for the third and final time of the first round, this time because of their trade with the Indianapolis Colts for Carson Wentz during the offseason. I explained this in my last video, but it's not certain that this pick will go to the Eagles yet. There is a chance that Carson Wentz gets injured or something and doesn't play the 75% of the snaps that he has to, but assuming Carson Wentz stays the Colts quarterback for the rest of the year, this pick will go to the Eagles. So, I've gone over 2 of the Eagles' biggest needs so far, but now it's time to go over the final one. Wide receiver, which is a bit weird considering how much the Eagles have tried to fix their receiving group over the past couple years. The Eagles drafted Devonta Smith in the top 10 last year, and he's been honestly quite incredible, but he's the only reliable receiving threat for the Eagles, which is worrying. Quez Watkins has been okay, but not even close to a truly good starting receiver, and while Jalen Reagor hasn't been awful, he has been a huge disappointment, and maybe we have to consider the idea that he isn't ever going to show much improvement for Philadelphia. I know bringing in wide receivers in the first round 3 drafts in a row is frankly unheard of, but when your receiving group is still very weak and you have 3 first round picks, it may be worth it. With this pick, I have the Eagles selecting another great wide receiver, and again, arguably the best in the class, Chris Olave. Olave is an excellent route runner, has good hands, and is incredibly fast. He's also explosive and is an incredible deep threat. The reason I think he may drop a little bit is because of his lack of physicality, but the Eagles have shown they don't necessarily care about that as they drafted Devonta Smith, a great but smaller and less physical receiver last year. Olave is an excellent receiver, and as an Eagles fan, I think the pairing of Chris Olave and Devonta Smith could be dominant going forward. Next up, the Chargers are on the clock, and they've been very solid this season, but undoubtedly the weakest spot on the team has to be the defensive line. The worst position on the team is defensive tackle, but there's no one left available that should be in the first round, so instead they'll take an edge rusher here. The best edge rusher available in my opinion is Drake Jackson from USC, which should make him the pick. Jackson is coming off a successful 5-sack season and brings pressure at an elite level. He even had an interception this season, which makes him even better of a defensive prospect. This would be a very solid pick for the Chargers. The Cardinals are up at number 24, and they have played so much worse recently compared to how well they were doing at the start of the year, but they are still definitely a playoff team. They have improved drastically from last year, but still have a few big holes in the team. One of the biggest is cornerback, and as I mentioned, there are a ton of great corners in this class, but in my opinion, the best available is Trent McDuffie from Washington. McDuffie is very athletic and reads QBs very well. He is successful in both man and zone coverage, and has had a couple successful seasons for the Washington Huskies. There are quite a few options here for the next cornerback off the board, but in my opinion, at least, McDuffie is the best option. The Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock at number 25. The AFC North is so interesting right now, and really anyone could win it, but I'm going to say that the Bengals end up topping the division and making the playoffs. The Bengals have gone so much better this season, but still have one huge need, and I think everyone knows what it is. Their offensive line is still very weak and needs to improve. Picking Jamar Chase worked out really well for them last year, but I don't think they can get away with passing on an O-lineman earlier this year as well. There are a couple options for them here, but I like Darian Kinnard. Kinnard is a reliable and very solid offensive tackle prospect. Like I said, there are a few solid offensive lineman options here, but personally I believe that Kinnard is the best, and I'm pretty sure that the Bengals would be incredibly happy if they picked up Kinnard here. Next up at number 26 is the Dallas Cowboys, and their secondary is definitely getting better, but they have quite a big hole at the safety position. Other than Kyle Hamilton, there isn't really a truly elite safety in the class, but I think there is one that should be a first-round pick, and that is Jaquan Brisker from Penn State. Brisker is a firm tackler and has multiple interceptions over the past couple years. I think Brisker is a very solid prospect, and I think he could fit very well on the Cowboys' defense. The Tennessee Titans are up next, and I'm going to rephrase what I said in my last mock draft. The Titans have multiple linebackers with expiring contracts after the season, so I have them reinforcing the position by bringing in one of the most talented linebackers in the class. Devin Lloyd has fallen a bit in this mock draft, but this is where his fall stops. Lloyd is an elite linebacker who's been truly incredible for Utah this season. Over 100 tackles, 7 sacks, 4 interceptions, and a forced fumble. You're not going to see better stats than his almost anywhere in college football this season. He has everything you could want in a linebacker prospect. Coverage ability, pressure, tackling ability, just everything. Getting Lloyd at this point in the draft would be an absolute steal of a pick, and I'm pretty sure the Titans would be incredibly happy to pick him up at this point. The Lions are up at number 28 because of the Matt Stafford trade with the Rams. Jared Goff has been getting better in recent weeks, but I'm not sure you can trust him to be a starting quarterback in the NFL for much longer. They need a QB, and they can maybe find one in Sam Howell from North Carolina. Now, I know that it might be a little controversial to have Howell being the pick instead of Desmond Ridder, but as I explained in my Thanksgiving mock draft, a lot of general managers don't believe that Ridder's a first-round QB, and believe that Howell is instead. In 3 years, Howell has thrown a shocking 91 touchdown passes and over 10,000 passing yards. Howell is accurate, has good arm strength, and as I just mentioned, he clearly throws a ton of touchdowns. He has also improved significantly as a runner this season. He went from having about 150 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground last year to having over 811 touchdowns this year. Howell is clearly a very talented quarterback, and while some don't think he should be a first-round pick, I think he will be. The Patriots are on the clock at number 29, and they've been so much better than a lot of us expected this season. However, they do still have a couple big needs. The biggest need, at least in my opinion, has to be wide receiver. Mac Jones has done a good job this year, but he definitely needs some more receiving targets. There are a couple good receivers left in the draft, including Drake London from USC. London got injured a few weeks ago and hasn't played since that, but was having an incredibly good season before that, and was arguably the best wide receiver in all of college football this year. London has the ability to turn any play into a big play, and is great in contested catch scenarios. He also has great hands. London isn't as speedy as some of the other receiver prospects in the class, and that injury is going to see him drop out at least a little bit on draft boards, but London is still an elite prospect and should easily be a first-round pick. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are up next, and their team is just so incredible on all sides of the ball. This pick is one of the hardest in the draft because I don't really see a standout need for them, but Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown both have expiring contracts after the year and could be on their way out. In case one of those, or even both of them leave after the season, they need to bring in at least some kind of reinforcement, and I like Jahan Dotson from Penn State. Dotson has ridiculous hands, athleticism, and dynamism. He's a great route runner, and has the ability to get up to make any catch. I love Dotson as a prospect, and I'm sure the Bucs would love this pick. The Chiefs are up at number 31, and after their awful start to this season, they're playing like an elite Super Bowl contender again. They're another team that, the way they're playing right now, don't really have any major needs. I think if anything, the Chiefs need to improve the defense a tiny bit, especially on the defensive line, so I'll give them the best defensive lineman available in my opinion, Myjai Sanders. Sanders has been a bit disappointing this season with only 2.5 sacks, but I still believe that he's a very talented player and should be a first-round pick. Sanders has 3 years of starting experience for Cincinnati, and could one day become a very solid starter in the National Football League. And finally, we have the Green Bay Packers. Like I said last time, the positioning of these playoff teams does not matter at all. It's just based off who will make the playoffs and who will have the best record. So this doesn't mean that the Packers are my Super Bowl pick, and it doesn't mean that the Packers aren't my Super Bowl pick. It just means I think they'll end up with the best record. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, it's time for the pick. The Packers don't have an incredible receiving group other than Devontae Adams, and with Adams having an expiring contract after the year, the Packers should really consider to bring in a wide receiver. There are a few decent options, but easily the best and the last first-round receiver in my opinion is Treylon Burks. Burks has absolutely blazing speed and is an incredible deep threat receiver. He also scores tons of touchdowns and is a decent route runner. Burks is a very good pick, and if he's available for the Green Bay, I believe he should be the pick. So that's it for my Christmas and holiday season mock draft. If you made it all the way through, thank you so much. I say it every time, but I really, really appreciate it. If you made it all the way through, I'm sure you're a big fan of the NFL or the NFL draft like I am, so make sure to subscribe. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and I'll see you guys next time.